The sun dipped low over the savannah, casting a golden glow on the lively village nestled at its edge. The sounds of chatter and laughter filled the air as children played by the riverbanks and women prepared meals over crackling fires. This was a place where tradition guided every heartbeat, and the wisdom of the elders shaped the path for each generation. In the heart of the village, the elders sat beneath the great baobab tree, their voices a steady rhythm of cautionary tales and proverbs. "Do not forget," Elder Adisa would often say, his voice gravelly with age. "The hunter who runs too fast misses the footprints of the prey." The younger villagers listened, though their eyes often drifted toward the city's distant lights, shimmering like a promise of something greater. The clash between these two worlds was silent but palpable, a thread woven into the fabric of the community. In this village lived Kwame, a quiet man whose hands bore the calluses of hard labor. He was a farmer, a provider, and a man of few words. He tended the land with care, believing that dignity came from honest work. But his wife, Abenya, saw things differently. She had once loved Kwame for his simplicity, but now she yearned for more. "Kwame," she said one evening as they sat outside their modest hut, the stars above like scattered beads, "do you not see how others in the city live? They wear fine clothes and eat meals we can only dream of. Why must we always struggle?" Kwame's voice was calm. "Abena, the earth provides for those who nurture it. What we have may be small, but it is enough." But to Abena, it was not enough. The stories she heard of wealth and success in the city played like a drumbeat in her mind, growing louder with each passing day. Her discontent began to spill into sharp words spoken behind closed doors. "Where are you so content with nothing?" she would ask, her tone biting. "Other men bring pride to their homes, but you only bring excuses." Kwame bore her words in silence, his heart heavy, but his spirit unbroken. He believed that patience and love could bridge the growing chasm between them. Yet, the cracks in their bond deepened. One night, the village gathered for a festival under the full moon. The air buzzed with excitement as drums pounded and dancers twirled, their shadows flickering against the firelight. Kwame stood among the men, his presence humble yet steady. Abena, however, watched him with a storm brewing in her eyes. When the moment came for families to present their offerings of gratitude, Abena, emboldened by frustration and the crowd, let her anger spill over. "Why should we present anything?" she said loudly, her voice cutting through the festive air. "What has Kwame given me but an empty pot and endless labor? Useless, that's what he is." A hush fell over the gathering. All eyes turned to Kwame, whose face remained stoic, though his heart clenched. The elders exchanged glances, their expressions somber. The whispers began, soft, pitying, judgmental. "Trust like this," they thought, 1,000,000 of them. "Did you hear her?" someone murmured. "How could she speak so of her husband?" whispered another. Kwame stood for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders carrying the weight of humiliation. Behind him, the murmurs grew louder, and Abena, realizing the gravity of her outburst, felt a pang of regret. But pride held her tongue. The village buzzed with talk for days. "Poor Kwame," they said. "A good man, but perhaps not strong enough to meet Abena's expectations." In the quiet of their home, Kwame sat alone, his thoughts a whirlwind. The humiliation had cut deep, but it was not the judgment of others that stung. It was the knowledge that his wife no longer saw his worth. As the moonlight streamed through the small window, he made a vow. "I will leave this place," he whispered to himself, "and I will return not as the man they mock, but as the man they respect." And with that, Kwame began to plan his departure, a journey that would test not only his strength, but also the bonds of love and resilience. Kwame stood at the edge of the village, the soft rustling of leaves and the distant hum of crickets filling the air. His mother, Amma, placed a hand on his shoulder, her weathered face creased with worry, but her voice steady as she spoke. "My son, the road ahead will be hard, but remember, the sun does not abandon the earth it warms. Carry this wisdom with you," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Kwame nodded, gripping the small cloth bag that held his few belongings. "I will return, mother. Not as I am now, but as a man you will be proud of." The elders, gathered beneath the baobab tree, watched silently. Elder Adisa stepped forward, placing a hand on Kwame's chest. "Strength is not in the wealth you hold, but in the heart that beats with purpose. Go with honor." Kwame bowed his head in gratitude and turned toward the path leading to the city. His steps were heavy with uncertainty, but within him, a spark of resolve burned brightly. The city was a world apart from the village. The streets were crowded, filled with unfamiliar faces that moved with a hurried, indifferent rhythm. Kwame's senses were overwhelmed by the cacophony of voices, the blaring of car horns, and the thick air heavy with smoke. He sought shelter where he could, sleeping under bridges or in crowded rooms shared with strangers. His hands grew rougher from long hours of menial labor, carrying sacks in the market, cleaning alleyways, and repairing broken carts. His body ached, but his spirit remained unyielding. Each evening, Kwame would sit quietly, replaying his mother's words in his mind. "The sun does not abandon the earth, it warms." It became his mantra, guiding him through the harshest days. One day, while hauling goods in a busy marketplace, Kwame caught the attention of Mr. Ade, a seasoned trader with a kind demeanor. The older man watched as Kwame worked tirelessly, his humility and determination shining through. "Young man," Mr. Ade called out, stopping him in his tracks. "What drives you to work so hard when others have long given up?" Kwame straightened, sweat dripping from his brow. "A promise I made, sir. To myself and to those who believe in me." Mr. Ade smiled, a spark of admiration lighting his eyes. "Then you shall work with me. A man with a purpose can move mountains." Under Mr. Ade's mentorship, Kwame learned the art of trade and negotiation. Slowly, his life began to change. The boy who had arrived with nothing now stood with the tools to rebuild his future. Meanwhile, back in the village, the absence of Kwame was felt deeply, though few spoke of it openly. Abina, however, bore the brunt of the villagers' whispers. "Did you hear what she said to him that night?" one woman murmured at the well. "A husband is like the roots of a tree. Cut them, and the tree will fall," another replied. Abina's heart grew heavy with the weight of their judgment. She would sit by the window of their empty home, staring at the fields Kwame once tended. It dawned on her, slowly and painfully, how much his quiet strength had held her world together. In her loneliness, she was drawn to Kojo, a wealthy trader who visited the village with promises of city riches. His charm was intoxicating, his words sweet like ripe mangoes. "A woman like you deserves more than this," he said, gesturing to her modest surroundings. For a moment, hope flickered in Abena's heart. She allowed herself to believe in the dream Kojo painted, a life of ease and luxury. But dreams often hide sharp thorns. Kojo's charm soon turned to control. His promises dissolved into demands, and his warm words grew cold. Abena found herself trapped, her once bright hope dimmed by the harsh reality of his true nature. The life she had yearned for felt further away than ever, and regret clung to her like a shadow. As Abena's world crumbled, Kwame's life began to rise. With Mr. Ade's guidance, he started a modest trade business, his reputation growing with each successful transaction. The city, once a place of struggle, became a ground for his triumph. But Kwame's success was not just in wealth. He found a sense of purpose and pride that had long eluded him. A man's worth, he often reminded himself, is in the strength of his character, not the weight of his purse. Back in the village, Abena sat alone, the walls of her once vibrant home now echoing with silence. She thought of Kwame, not the man she had criticized, but the man who had worked tirelessly, who had endured her sharp words with patience. The villagers noticed the stark contrast. "Kwame has risen like the morning sun," they said, and Abena, "she has fallen into the night." The tale of their contrasting paths spread, becoming a quiet lesson whispered among the people. While Kwame climbed higher, Abena's descent into despair deepened, the weight of her choices pressing heavily on her soul. Kwame stood before the bustling market stall, watching customers haggle and barter with the kind of confidence that years of hard work had finally earned him. His business, modest but thriving, was a reflection of his perseverance. Mr. Ade stood nearby, his face lined with pride. "You've done well, Kwame," he said, clapping a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "Few can rise as you have. Remember, success is not measured by riches alone, but by the respect you earn." Kwame nodded, his voice steady. "Your lessons guided me, sir. You taught me that a man's worth lies in his deeds, not in what others say." As word of Kwame's accomplishments spread, whispers began to reach the village. The once dismissive voices of neighbors softened, replaced by murmurs of admiration. "Kwame has become a great man," one elder said, shaking his head in disbelief. "The boy we thought had no ambition now commands respect in the city." It was in these whispers that Kwame's name regained its honor. But for Kwame, success alone was not enough. One evening, as the city lights flickered against the horizon, he made a decision. It was time to return. "I must face my past," he said to himself, not as a man seeking validation, but as one who has found his place. The village path stretched before him, familiar yet different. The baobab trees swayed gently in the breeze, as though welcoming him home. As Kwame approached the village, children ran ahead, shouting with excitement. The elders gathered, their faces a mixture of surprise and respect. "Kwame, you have returned," Elder Adisa said, stepping forward. "Your journey has been long, but your spirit has endured." Kwame bowed his head humbly. "I come not to boast, but to share the lessons I have learned." In another corner of the village, Abena sat alone in the dim light of her small home. Kojo's betrayal had left her with nothing but debts and disgrace. His promises of wealth and comfort had dissolved into lies, and he had disappeared as quickly as he had come. When she finally returned to the village, her shoulders hunched with shame, The reception was cold. The whispers she had once encouraged now turned against her. She spoke ill of Kwame, and now look at her, a woman said, shaking her head. Pride brought her low, another added. Even the brightest bead can fall into the dust. Abena avoided their gazes, her heart heavy with regret. She thought often of Kwame, his quiet strength, his unwavering love. Each memory was a mirror reflecting her flaws, and each night brought a silence that forced her to confront the pain she had caused. As the villagers gathered to welcome Kwame, Abena lingered on the edge of the crowd. Her hands trembled, but she knew what she had to do. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kwame," she called, her tone laced with regret. "May I speak with you?" The crowd parted, and Kwame turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet strength. Abena lowered her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "I let my pride blind me, and I spoke words that can never be taken back. You deserved better from me, better than my anger, better than my scorn." Kwame listened in silence, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. The villagers watched, their judgment replaced by curiosity and awe. Later, under the shade of the baobab tree, Kwame sat with the elders. "What should I do?" he asked, his voice tinged with both pain and uncertainty. "Her words wounded me deeply, but I see her suffering now." Elder Adisa leaned forward, his voice firm yet kind. "The strongest heart is not the one that holds grudges, but the one that forgives. Redemption is a path for both the wronged and the repentant." Kwame nodded, the wisdom settling within him. "Then I will forgive," he said softly, "not because the pain has vanished, but because I will not let it define me." When Kwame found Abena again, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I do not ask for your love," she said, "only for a chance to make amends." Kwame's voice was gentle. "Abena, forgiveness does not erase the past, but it can guide us toward a better future. Begin your journey anew, as I have." The villagers watched in silence, their hearts stirred by the exchange. From that day on, Kwame's story became a lesson, shared beneath the baobab tree for generations to come. It was a tale of humility, redemption, and the enduring power of forgiveness. Kwame stood beneath the shade of the great baobab tree, the village's heart and symbol of resilience. Abena knelt before him, her head bowed, the weight of her words as heavy as the silence that surrounded them. The villagers had gathered, their eyes shifting between the two, waiting for what would happen next. "Kwame," Abena said, her voice trembling but earnest. "I come not to plead for what we once had. I know my pride has broken more than words can mend. I only ask for your forgiveness, though I know I do not deserve it." Kwame's face remained unreadable, his silence stretching like the shadow of the tree. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but tinged with pain. "Abena, forgiveness is not a simple thing. It is a seed, planted in the soil of understanding and watered by time. I can forgive you, but the scars you left behind cannot be erased." Abena looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand," she whispered. "I will carry the burden of those scars, but I must also carry the lesson they have taught me." Kwame nodded, the heaviness in his chest beginning to lift. Forgiveness is not a gift for the forgiven alone. It frees the one who gives it. I forgive you, Abena. But forgiveness does not mean we can return to what was. I have grown, and I will not lose the man I have become. The crowd murmured, their respect for Kwame deepening. His words, though firm, carried a wisdom that resonated with the elders, who nodded in approval. Abena wiped her tears, her heart heavy but resolute. You are a better man than I deserved, Kwame. From this day forward, I will dedicate myself to helping others, to giving back to the village I once ignored. Perhaps in time, I can earn back a fraction of the respect I have lost. Kwame offered her his hand, helping her to her feet. The path of redemption is not an easy one, Abena. But if you walk it with sincerity, the village will see your heart. The elders gathered the children beneath the baobab that evening, as was tradition. Elder Adisa cleared his throat, his voice carrying the weight of years of storytelling. Today, we have witnessed the story of Kwame and Abena, a tale of pain, pride, and redemption. Listen well, for this story holds lessons you must carry into your own lives. The children leaned closer, their eyes wide as Adisa continued. Kwame's strength did not come from wealth or power, but from his perseverance and humility. He showed us that a man's worth lies in his character, not in what others think of him. Another elder, Amma, added, and Abena's journey teaches us that pride can blind even the wisest among us. But it is never too late to change. Redemption requires work, but it is always possible for those who seek it with honesty. The fire crackled, its glow illuminating the faces of the villagers as they nodded in agreement. The younger generation listened intently, the weight of the story settling into their hearts. As the night deepened, the village grew quiet. But the tale of Kwame and Abena remained alive, passed from elder to child, generation to generation. It became a story not of despair, but of hope. A reminder that true wealth lies not in possessions, but in the courage to rise above one's mistakes and the strength to forgive. The baobab tree stood tall, its roots deep and unshaken, much like the lessons it had witnessed. And under its watchful presence, the village continued, guided by the wisdom of those who had come before. The village sat in the glow of the evening fire, the crackling flames reflected in the wide, eager eyes of the children who gathered around the elders. Tonight, Elder Adisa prepared to share a tale etched deep in the heart of the community. His voice carried the rhythm of wisdom, every word resonating with the weight of lessons learned. Children, listen closely, he began, his voice low and deliberate. This is the story of Kwame, a man who once walked among us as though unseen, but who proved that quiet determination can transform even the smallest seed into the tallest tree. Kwame's name had once been spoken with pity, but now it was uttered with reverence. The elder leaned forward, his gaze sweeping across the attentive faces. In his darkest hour, when others mocked him, Kwame chose not to speak back with anger or bitterness. Instead, he let his actions speak. Through patience and toil, he built a life of honor and respect. The elder's voice softened, yet grew stronger with emotion. Remember, children, that true strength is not in loudness, but in persistence. Kwame began with nothing, yet became a man all of us could look up to. It was his faith in himself, even when others doubted. that turned the tides of his fortune. Elder Amma, seated beside Adisa, took over the story. Her voice was filled with the weight of caution. But the tale does not end with Kwame. No, for where there is humility, there is also pride, and pride can be like fire. It warms, but it can also burn. The power in the mountains can protect, and the naming of the creatures with a profane, formally appropriate word with fire and rage leads to Satan. She fixed the children with a piercing gaze. Abena, Kwame's wife, was blinded by her desire for what she did not have. She could not see the treasure she already held. She let her pride speak cruel words that cut her husband like a knife. Amma sighed, her voice dropping to a whisper. And when she chased after wealth and grandeur, she lost not only her husband, but her dignity. The world she built on pride crumbled beneath her feet, leaving her to face the bitter truth of her own choices. The elder gestured to the stars above, their light scattered across the dark sky. Abina's suffering reminds us to look beyond what glitters, to cherish the light of what we already hold. Adisa nodded solemnly, his voice now heavier with wisdom. But even in suffering, there is a chance for redemption. Kwame's heart was scarred, yet he found the strength to forgive. Forgiveness, children, is a test of the strongest among us. It is not for the weak, for it demands that we let go of anger and pain, Amma added. And redemption, too, is not a gift. Abena had to work for it, to earn back the respect she had lost. She turned her pain into purpose, helping the village she once neglected. Her journey shows us that redemption requires more than words. It demands a changed heart and a life of sincere effort. The elders allowed the fire to crackle in silence for a moment before Amma spoke again. And what of our community? What role did we play? The elders, who guided Kwame and Abena, remind us of the power of wisdom passed down from one generation to the next. Adisa gestured to the baobab tree towering behind them. This tree stands strong not because it grew quickly, but because its roots are deep, its foundation firm. In the same way, our stories, our traditions, and our lessons are the roots that keep us standing. He turned back to the children, his voice carrying a finality that signaled the end of the tale. Kwame and Abina's story is more than a memory. It is a warning and a guide. True wealth, children, lies not in gold or silver, but in humility, perseverance, and the courage to grow beyond our mistakes. You made themselves, even when the world seems to fall apart. Infusing wealth, children, lies not in gold or silver, but in humility, perseverance, and the courage to grow beyond our mistakes. The children sat still, their minds weaving the lessons into their hearts. As the elders' voices faded into the night, the baobab tree seemed to sway gently, its roots deeper than any storm could shake. And under its watchful shadow, the village carried on, each person a living testament to the wisdom of those who came before. The story of Kwame and Abena, though passed down as a cautionary tale, remained a beacon of hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one could find the strength to rise again.